Moving on to another BBC brief, always forward, never straight, the virtues of an untraditional path to investing. Here to tell us what that means is Mel Strong, founding partner, Next Ventures VC firm. Mel has spent her career building high-performing teams with a commitment to creating positive culture change through sports health. This work includes her 17 years at Nike, driving international businesses across running, women's, soccer, football, and action sports. She helped launch the Nike Run Club and Nike Training Club apps, and was most recently vice president for Nike Skateboarding. She co-founded investing for Next Ventures in 2019, inspired by the potential for new businesses to innovate in the health and wellness industries. She sits on the boards of performance brands Momentous and Honey Stinger, Wildfang Apparel, and nonprofits Women in Sports Tech and Outdoor Afro. She also owns a mountain bike tour guide company with her husband in Hood River. She's the coolest. Okay, she's the coolest. Welcome to the BBC stage, Mel. Get on up here.
Thanks. Oh my gosh, I do have some spare time. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. How was lunch? I know I'm like right after lunch, which I know was good or bad, depending on how your lunch went. But I'm really glad to be here. And I wanted to actually start by calling out this community because I am a pretty new investor and fund manager. I've been doing this for about 3 years, or like 5 minutes in VC life. And all of you have been really supportive, and I actually didn't realize how beautiful this ecosystem was going to be here this weekend until I got here last night. So I'm here because of Deanne Buck, who I've actually known for a long time from the outdoor industry, but I see John Maroney here, who was one of those lovely people when I was still at Nike, who would have coffee with me and explain VC and sort of like casually guide me into a different direction in my career. There's Angela Jackson here from Portland Seed Fund. I think there's also Ken Meidel from Kent Outdoors, who introduced me to my business partner. And then last night I had the honor of having dinner with Abby Bruning from Oregon Sports Angels, who's a long lifetime friend from Nike, and Cassie from Wild Rye. And Abby and I are both angel investors in Cassie. And that all happened like last night. Like I had an idea that some of you were going to be here. I knew it was going to be great. But I think what's really cool about our ecosystem in the Pacific Northwest is exactly that. Like the connections are pretty different, and I think they're more meaningful and less competitive. And I spend a lot of time in San Francisco, and that scene is so different. So I wanted to thank you all for being part of my journey, our collective journeys. Like I really do feel like we have something special here. So the team wanted me to share a little bit about my journey. It's a bit untraditional, and I think there are some similar stories in the room, and I want to hear from you, hopefully, at the end here. I did have a great career at Nike, and so I get a lot of questions about, like, why? Why did you leave a job? I worked really hard to get to a good place there as an entry-level employee in 2002. So why did I leave this great job for a brand I love to do this crazy ride called venture capital? It actually starts here. So according to the National Venture Capital Association, there are 2,000 firms out there in the US investing. There are about 4,000 funds managed by those firms, and there are about $600 billion under management with those investors and fund managers. And a lot of them have pretty homogeneous paths to VC, as many of you may know. A lot of them went to really good schools, the Harvards, Stanfords. A lot of them started in investment banking. A lot of them took a pretty linear path to get to where they are. And I used to be really intimidated by that as a new VC, but I actually feel like now my differences are a superpower. And this is actually where I started. So my first job out of school was first grade teaching. So it's low res because, 90s. But this is McMichael Elementary School, and this was my first grade classroom. And I spent a few years there teaching in West Philadelphia. It was a really impacted community in an area of Philadelphia that does not have access to great teachers, great resources, a lot of the economic benefits that a lot of other school districts have. And it was really, really hard. So I spent my first few years out of school really learning how to think differently about access. This is sort of a line throughout my whole career. I ended up going back to school and getting a master's in journalism. And I worked for this great organization called the Center for Public Integrity. They're in DC. They were founded by this wonderful man named Charles Lewis, who was the executive producer at 60 Minutes, which I still watch. I hope they're still relevant. Do great investigative reporting. And we wrote exposés about people in power who were abusing that power. So a lot of work around soft money contributors to political campaigns, tax cheats. I spent a lot of time in tax court and learned how to use data to tell stories and hopefully tell the truth. So this was my foray into my next chapter, which was Nike. And so some of you are probably wondering, like, how did the Nike thing happen? I was on assignment with Runner's World magazine in 2002. I had always been a runner, so I grew up as a cross-country runner. Running was very much a part of my experience as a young woman, like finding strength in my body, finding community through my team. And so I very much identified with the power that sports had provided me as a young woman. And so I was doing a story on this incredible person named Joan Benoit Samuelson. And if any of you grew up in the running community, you know that she's done more for women's running probably than anyone else, at least of my generation. There's a whole new generation of amazing women, including women here in Bend. But I was so nervous. I had like 20 minutes with Joan. At the time, she was breaking some record. I can't even remember what it was. And I ended up spending like all day with Joan. I just followed her around the runner's lounge at the Boston Marathon Prudential Center. And by the end of the day, she had kind of talked me into applying for any sort of job at Nike. And I didn't know where Nike was. Again, I was an East Coast girl. I know that's probably horrible to say in the West Coast now, in Pacific Northwest, in these halls. But, Nike had never been on my radar because, again, first grade teacher, journalist, like it didn't really fit that profile. And so I ended up applying for a job as a digital producer for NikeRunning.com and NikeACG.com, back when ACG was around the first time. And quit my job on a Friday on the East Coast and started Nike on a Monday. And it was a pretty wild ride. Part of the interview process was running twice around the Nike berm, which I think is like totally illegal. But it actually didn't cross my mind. I took a red eye from Philly the night before, and they were like, hey, do you have your running stuff? I'm like, yeah, of course. So I ended up running with my hiring manager, who later told me that I actually bombed the interview. Terrible. Like, every single person was like, she's awful. But I was a good runner, and we hit it off, and somehow he convinced them to let me give it a try. And that started a long and crazy and sometimes very difficult career. I had zero experience with the corporate world, but it ended up being what I call now like an 18-year MBA. I had the opportunity to work on some incredible campaigns, to launch some, I think, really significant innovation for sports. I don't know how many of you remember this product, the Fuel Band. I still have a couple. I hope someday they're worth something. Nike's foray into hardware. That was pre-Apple Watch days. But all really fun things that helped me understand how to galvanize a team around a mission. I really always felt like we were doing something like bigger and more important than just selling shoes. I had some really hard jobs, like running Nike Women at a time in 2016 when gender was becoming less binary, and that wasn't a very comfortable place for us as a brand to figure out how to move forward, how to be modern, how to think about not putting consumers into boxes from a gender perspective. That was a really hard job. SB was awesome, my favorite job. One, because not a lot of executives at Nike really gave a crap about skateboarding, which meant that we could just figure out how to run that business the right way without needing to spend a lot of time being diplomatic or presenting. I think it was just a really cool and interesting foray for Nike into a new world they didn't understand. And I really loved that experience. So about 10 years into my Nike journey, I sort of lifted my head up. And I remember actually sitting down with John and wondering why there weren't more Nike people involved in the ecosystem in Portland. We go back and forth between wherever we live in Beaverton, and we work really hard, and we do, I think, some really important things, but I wasn't seeing any of us in the startup community. I didn't see a lot of us investing. I didn't see a lot of us founding companies. And I didn't see us participating positively in like the next generation of companies in the sports space. And I thought we had a lot to contribute there, and I wondered why. And so a couple really cool things happened at that time. One, we just started this company, which is super fun. So if you're ever in Hood River, please come ride with us. But this was a really cool opportunity for me to become a founder and really feel what that was like as a business owner, to create an LLC. Like, I know it sounds silly, but like there was a big difference between creating and launching something within the Nike ecosystem and doing it on your own. And there's so many amazing founders in this room who understand that more than I ever will. But the outdoors really saved my life at Nike because it was such a hard place to be sometimes. We worked really hard. The culture wasn't always great. And having a community of people that I could get outdoors with who like didn't want to talk about work, they actually weren't impressed with my Nike thing at all, which was really healthy for me. And having the experience of having friends and strangers actually fall in love with this sport that had become such an oasis for me in what was otherwise kind of a busy life was really what inspired this business. And we're still running it. It's been a really cool experience for us to be riding this wave of new people participating in outdoor rec. We have e-bikes now because there are a lot of new entrants into cycling who want to have the experience of riding, but the kind of analog bike may be too intimidating. And there are tons of women, tons of people of color who haven't felt maybe welcomed into the outdoor space, who I hope are feeling a little more welcome because of the work that we do and a lot of other awesome people in our community. So this was one thing that happened about 10 years into my Nike career that sort of like nudged me a little further into perhaps a change of career. And then the second was I started angel investing. And this was pretty embarrassing for me. I could not believe that my peer group was not participating in this asset class, right? Like I think as women especially and female executives, for some reason we were way more comfortable writing a check in a nonprofit than we were investing in a company that could be also doing really good things and perhaps deliver returns. And so we started, we being a bunch of us in my peer group at Nike, specifically women, talking about like what we could do to change that. And could we provide some advice and counsel and experience through our own mistakes in the sports industry to a whole new group of founders. And so I really credit the women in particular that my husband and I angel invested in as the people who helped me understand what kind of investor I wanted to be. I don't know how many of you know Lynn Lee from Society 9 in the center, who I adore and talked to this morning, actually. She was my very first angel check. And so what I loved about Lynn and our journey together is she helped me understand how difficult it was to raise, how difficult it was to be in front of rooms like this, especially as a woman, Vietnamese woman, who's diminutive, but super tough if you've ever met Lynn in person, and understand all the real and perceived barriers for her around raising for her company. So I learned a ton from Lynn. There's several ex-Nike friends on here, like Misha, who's the founder of Soleil Space, and Vita and Ronit, who are the founders of WeNatal. These are all women who I feel have helped me understand why I want to do the work I'm doing today. And so in 2019, I took the leap after a bunch of misstarts. I was super scared to leave Nike. I wasn't actually sure I could afford to pay myself a salary of any sort. All the things that I think founders also deal with, which was why I chose the path I chose. You can imagine that for folks with a certain kind of Nike or corporate pedigree, there are venture firms who would love to have us on their teams, and I certainly found that to be the case. And so I spent time talking to Andreessen and Kleiner Perkins and 8VC, and they were all like nice people, But I didn't actually feel like I would see the whole end-to-end experience of building something from scratch like I would doing what I ended up doing on starting something from scratch. And I feel like this has made me, again, a better investor because we had to go out and fundraise. And so in 2019, we started to hit the market talking about our firm, Next Ventures, which is an early stage health and wellness firm. So our dream is to be able to look around our portfolio and see lots of companies who are removing barriers of entry to healthier living. And so our first investment was actually Oura Ring, which was super fun. And I've actually seen a couple of them here, which makes me super happy. I need to get them out of like just the Bay Area scene. So if you know anyone who needs to learn about Oura Ring, please let me know. I actually bought them for my family because there are certain things that you can measure through your finger, like heart rate variability, body temperature, quality of sleep, that are more accurate here than on your wrist. And so this was our very first investment back before we knew how much money we were going to raise. We were targeting 50. And it was a great bet for us, and it's still one of our fastest growing companies. But our thesis is really about access, and that whole idea of the ways in which certain communities and people don't either have financial access or community access to the different ways we can be healthier, happier humans is really the mission for Next Ventures. We've made all the mistakes, too, just in terms of fund construction. I still run payroll. Look forward to the day when I can hire someone to do that. And we'll get there. But for me, I wouldn't have traded this experience of all the failures and all the mistakes that helped me understand how to be a better investor today. And part of my mission, for those of you who may be in a position to be thinking about your next chapter, who don't think you have the right pedigree, like I please encourage you, well, one, reach out, and I'd love to tell you about my journey, the ins and outs, the things I would have done differently. But two, to just encourage you to make the leap, because it's never too late. You know, for someone like me at the, I don't know, endish, maybe of my corporate career, it would have been really easy to stay at Nike for like 10 more years. But I actually wasn't learning anything anymore, you know, and I don't think I realized that until I left to do this hard and really, really fun work of building Next Ventures. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit more about our firm. We're about to go out and raise our second fund, which is super exciting, and we have had 2 exits. And again, if this is new space for you, I'd love to tell you a little more about what we've learned and what we're rolling into our next fund, just so we can be better and smarter. And I guess my last thought before we open it up to Q&A, you know, if you have sort of a different path that's gotten you here, if you have certain parts of your academic background or cultural experience, I hope that you can consider your differences as strengths. It has taken me a really, really long time to get comfortable with my differences as a woman in VC, because there aren't a ton of us. I'm half Japanese, so there's another difference there that may or may not be visible to people, but that I very much feel in certain communities and in certain rooms. And then I don't have the typical background, right, of having gone to the school and then done the investment banking thing and then worked my way up. And I actually think that that's, and I hope that you would hear this from our founders, makes us better as investors because we do have a different path, and it's been scarier, we've taken more risks, and we've learned more things. So that would be my message to all of you, to whether you're a founder, I know there's a bunch of students in the room as well, and then very well-respected and experienced investors. Many of you have way more experience than I do. So like, bring me back in 10 years, and then I'll tell you how we did. But it's been exciting to represent a new generation of VCs and investors and fund managers. And so if any of you are interested in taking that path, please let me know. That's it. I would love to hear questions.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mel. I told you, she's the coolest. I need to get an Oura Ring. What am I doing?
I know someone.
Cool. You do?
I do.
Hook me up. Thank you for this. This is awesome. And I think I love hearing you identify that your differences are your strengths. I think it's a really powerful message, and we should all feel empowered to move forward if we feel called, right? So how did you get Eric Costin to join the Nike SB team?
Oh, Eric Costin's so great. You know, Eric, for those of you who don't know who Eric Costin is, I love that this is the first question. Such an insider question. Eric is an LA skater, an OG, very well respected in the skateboarding community, but also sort of transcends skateboarding. His coolness factor definitely has made him an athlete and a rider, and he would, by the way, cringe that I just called him an athlete. But as a rider, there are many like NBA players, including several of Nike's, that have wanted to spend time learning how to skateboard because of Eric. And so, you know, it really ended up just being an opportunity for us to introduce Eric Costin as a skateboarder to a much broader and mainstream audience, because that's what Nike does. You know, if Nike's going to get into a sport, and I spent a lot of time fighting the battle of why skateboarding. I lost the battle of why Nike snowboarding. We had to shut down that business. Same with Nike surf. But we won the battle with skateboarding because of people like Eric Costin, who just represented a different type of skateboarder from a cultural and fashion and music perspective that could really bring something to the brand that our more traditional core athletes couldn't. Who asked that question?
Reveal yourself.
Yes, love that. Thank you.
Does Next Ventures consider outdoor rec and tech opportunities?
For sure, especially if they are enabling any sort of healthy behavior. Absolutely. We haven't done any footwear or apparel deals yet. But again, we're out raising our second fund, and so we hope to expand our thesis a little bit more. It'll still be like whole person health. But we just invested in our first plant-based protein, which I never thought we would have done 2 years ago. So we're always looking for companies that are creating access. And if your company in the outdoor tech space or outdoor product space is removing barriers, then well, absolutely, we'd be interested.
That's great. Many VCs come to it from being product entrepreneurs themselves. To what extent did you consider doing that rather than going directly into VC?
Yeah, so like joining a startup first. Absolutely, that was a consideration. I actually, I don't think she would mind that I shared this, but if you've heard of Bolt Threads, they have an office in Portland. Their main office is in Emeryville, California. I was really interested in making vegan skate shoes. And I wanted to, because so many of our riders were vegan or vegetarian, and really good skate shoes have to hold up to a lot of abrasion, and so they tend to be made out of animal products. And so I met Sue Levin, who, by the way, is the founder of Title IX, Lucy, Apparel in Portland. And she kind of wooed me into looking at a role on her team. I ended up having the opportunity to do Next Ventures, which I think was pretty special, so I went that route instead. But I think it's really great to have that experience as well, especially for someone like me who has never worked in a startup environment. I actually was chief marketing officer at Aura last year for about 8 months, and I had to unlearn a lot of stuff from Nike. You know, Nike's big, we got big budgets, lots of teams doing all the specific things. And we didn't have those kinds of budgets at Aura. And so I had to learn how to be a good leader and a good marketer in a growth startup, which was really hard for me. So I would definitely encourage folks to take that path as well.
This is a fun question. How can we get involved in Next Ventures?
Oh my goodness. I mean, we're going to be hiring at some point, which is going to be great. Yeah. After we close our second fund, we'll be hiring at a few levels, actually. So if that's of interest, cool. If you're a founder and want to understand our thesis, I'm at Mel at nextventures.com. We have a really good Substack, and I know every investor says we have a great blog or newsletter or whatever. But what I love about our newsletter is we throw out areas of interest, and we hear from founders who are building in that area. So for example, we were really interested in finding those people who are building more awareness and access, specifically for women and people of color, to cancer clinical trials. Something like 95% of clinical trials in the US for cancer are participated in white men. And so we just put that out there and found Dr. Hala Borno from UCSF, who is an oncologist and who's building a great company called Trial Library at solving that problem. So follow us if you want to learn more about our investment strategy and our portfolio companies, but we're at all the places. I'm a terrible Twitter person. I am there, but I hardly ever go there. but I'm everywhere else. So please look for me, and I'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Mel. Yes, please find out more about what Mel's up to. I still have like 10 more questions, so I'm going to be finding you. But
Awesome.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Of course. Thank you, everyone.